Good afternoon, everybody. We are starting the second session of the REELIH Regional Conference. My name is Oleg Zubinsky. I am a regional advisor at the Sustainable Energy Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE. And we will focus today on financing residential energy efficiency. We have a distinguished panel today. Speakers today represent international organizations, national organizations, and international financial institutions. So we'll have Violeta Kogalnicianu, who is head of Infrastructure and Energy Efficiency Unit at the Energy Community Secretariat. Grzegorz Gajda, Senior Urban Sector Specialist at the European Investment Bank. Andrew Popelka is Senior Energy Advisor at the Energy and Infrastructure Division Bureau for Europe and Eurasia at the USAID, United States Agency for International Development. Meron Lukic represents the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. He is Principal Banker at Infrastructure Europe there. And Eda Omic is economist at the Council of Europe Development Bank. So that's who we have today. And I think it's good to start right away. We would start with some opening statements from our 5 panelists, and I give the floor to Violeta Kogalnicianu first. Violeta, please, the floor is yours. Thank you. Violeta, you need to unmute yourself, please.
It's better now. Yes. I said, thank you very much. I am delighted to sit on a panel with so many distinguished bankers and money people. I think it's only Andrew and myself that are not necessarily in that business, but I believe we can bring a few additional insights to the topic. And to start with, next slide, please. Next slide, please. It doesn't move, huh? Ludmila, can you move to the next slide? Nothing happens. I can deliver it without the slides, but it would be a pity.
I think that the audience can see the slides.
Okay, now I see that. Yeah. Okay. So just in a nutshell, the energy community is a platform for cooperation. It's based on a treaty, so it's a kind of mandatory platform once you agree to participate. It's about the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, the contracting parties, and it's also about the approximation of the national legislation to the EU energy acquis, and energy acquis includes also a lot of non-energy like competition, environment, and the state aid dimensions and statistics, for example, but also energy efficiency, renewables, electricity and gas, and so forth. And the scope of this treaty is to help countries develop the energy sector, reform the energy sector, and create the energy markets with the view of accessing the EU in a nutshell. Now, I would like to, next slide, please. I would like to make my presentation a bit linked between the energy efficiency, especially in residential sector, especially in low-income households, to the energy poverty. And for that, I will just briefly speak about the latest pieces of legislation, EU acquis, that reflect a lot more and significantly clearer the obligations to take energy poverty into due consideration. So to start with, in the Clean Energy Package of 2018, the Commission and EU member states adopted a regulation on governance that clearly asked member states and, in a nutshell, also the energy community to assess the number of households in energy poverty. And if this is significant, they will have to address this in their national energy and climate plans with clear measures and objectives, and report on this as well. So the second piece of legislation is a directive on common rules for the internal energy market for electricity, basically, again in 2019, and the member states and also the energy community contracting parties have to establish and publish the criteria to define, to assess the number of customers that are in energy poverty, vulnerable customers, and also to take measures to protect these, but without distorting the market through direct price intervention, so other measures. Also, the Energy Efficiency Directive of 2018 asked mandatory requests that different energy efficiency measures will be implemented in the households affected by energy poverty and in social housing. And then there are other directives, the Buildings Directive and also the Renewables Energy Directive that also talk about energy poverty. So next slide, please. This being said, we also in the Energy Community Secretariat are very much preoccupied with this subject of energy poverty, and we launched a study, we also commissioned it, and now we have some results. And I just wanted to share with you the results on Ukraine, where we have chosen in the study to use 3 indicators to define energy poverty. And one of them is obviously the areas on utility bills. The other one is inability to keep home adequately warm, not warm, sorry for the typo. The third one will be the level of condensation, leaking roofs, rotten windows and doors. And you can see, probably not very easy to see, the numbers, the percentage. So obviously, when you look from left to right, on each chart, you have these deciles. So people with more income at the end of the graph, so number 10, 8, 9, but people with really low incomes, they are highly affected. 34% are unable to pay their household bill. 21% live in poor housing conditions, and 40% cannot keep their houses warm in this lowest income category. So next slide, please. This being said, now I would like to refer a bit of what kind of financing for energy efficiency in households, not necessarily or not only the low-income households, but in general. And I will be referring to 2 regions, if you want. One is Ukraine in itself, which is large enough to make a region, and then the Western Balkans. But to start with Ukraine, I borrowed this slide from the Ukrainian Energy Efficiency Fund. This is a very interesting model, if you want. It is developed to supply a combination of grants, technical assistance, but also lending opportunities with different banks to households and only households. So the fund itself, actually, there are 2 funds in one. The left part of the chart is the public Ukrainian Energy Efficiency Fund with 90 million June last year endowment, and this is the budget supported fund. And then the right-hand fund is a contribution from EU and the German government with 100 million. So basically you have approximately soon to be 200 million euros in this financing facility that, as I said, uses a lot of technical support for preparation, a combination of grants, incentives, grants for works, but also the lending from the financing institution, national financing institution. Next slide, please. A few figures. Next. Yeah, it takes a bit. A few figures on the achievements to, as I said, June last year. In total, the applications received were approximately 700, of which approximately 600 were for the package called the comprehensive renovation, which is interesting because I thought they will go for sort of cheaper options, but no, it looks like this makes more sense to households to have deeper renovations, so including the insulation of the envelope. And the project value to date, or to that particular date when we have the latest figures, was 166 million euros, of which, or to which 108 million in grants. So practically you have approximately 65% of grants. They also come, as I said, from these different streams of money, but all in all, there is a significant component of this financing. Of course, the savings are also rewarding. So, for example, the savings are calculated or even documented wherever there was already an implementation to approximately 13 million euros per year, a lot of reduction of CO2 emissions, and there is a lot of households already included, 62,000. Next slide.
Violeta, just a small reminder, you're coming very close to your limit for the initial statement. So please.
Okay. Now I'll rush through it. The Commission also embarked seriously in the Western Balkans with the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans and the investment plan, and this has a flagship called Renovation Wave. That tells you everything, the importance of buildings renovation for the European Commission for the Western Balkans. Next slide. Yeah. Also in the making of this flagship practically and implementable, the Commission will tackle the energy poverty and the worst performing buildings, renovating multi-owners buildings, and also improving national and long-term, the legal framework, especially with adopting national long-term renovation strategies. Now, next slide. This is how some of the buildings look like. We don't need to stay too long on this one. Next, please. Now, also the Western Balkans benefit from an instrument called REEP, Regional Energy Efficiency Program. And within REEP, which is a rather comprehensive package of different financing facilities and incentives package and technical assistance package. One of them, and I only refer to this one, is called Green Energy Financing Facility, GAFF. And this financing facility is dedicated only to households and buildings renovation. Next, please. I think the latest data I have is that GAFF already signed 111 million euros in this blending mechanism. But the most important message here is that the level of incentives, grant incentive, it's not more than 20% on average, and the absolute maximum level could be 35% if the package is very, very comprehensive. I'm sure that Meran will give you more details on that. So in a nutshell, we have different models throughout different regions. Still, I would say the multi-apartment buildings are very difficult nut to crack, and still there is a lot to be sort of developed for this particular segment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Violeta. That was quite comprehensive and good to know all the things that the energy community is doing. And and what it is doing in cooperation with the financial institutions and the governments of the energy community member states. We now move to Grzegorz Gajda, who is the Senior Urban Sector Specialist at European Investment Bank. As Violeta said, it would be good to hear now from people who have the money, what their views are on improving energy efficiency in residential buildings in this region. Grzegorz, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Oleg. And I'm very happy to be able to speak after the presentation of Violeta, because it gave an excellent introduction to what I'm going to be talking about. So I will focus on my experience in financing residential energy efficiency in multifamily residential buildings in Ukraine, actually. And the work I've done in Ukraine actually created grounds for the fund that Violeta described in her presentation. So I have divided my little speech in 4 parts, and I will be talking about 4 challenges. And then I will finish my presentation with the finance. But the key to understand the sector is to understand its 4 challenges. So the first challenge that we face in residential energy efficiency in multi-apartment buildings is the fact that we invest in a building, but energy saving actually happens in a boiler house, which is located somewhere else. And it is not obvious that by spending money in a building, we will have the savings in the boiler house. And this is critical that we bring those savings there. What it means in practice is that between the building and the boiler house, there has to be a transmission mechanism that transmits data on energy demand in a building before and after renovation. And the boiler house has to be able to understand these messages and react to it by lowering consumption of fuel. That is one challenge, a technical one. Second challenge, an institutional one, is the challenge related to the fact that in a multifamily residential building, the changes that would actually save energy have to be implemented on a scale of a building as a whole. Renovation of individual apartments will not bring energy efficiency in a multifamily residential building. So insulation of the facade or replacement of windows or investments related to internal building heating network have to be done in a building as a whole. And in this building, we have a very big number of individual families, and they have to have an efficient decision-making mechanism. And this is critical to their being able to do those investments. So this is a second challenge, and it's an institutional challenge. Now, the third challenge that we have in this sector is related to the fact that we would invest in this building. The savings may happen at the boiler house, but do we really convert those savings of fuel into monetary savings? So it all depends on how energy is priced in the country that we are dealing in, how social security works, because in order to be able to generate monetary savings from the physical savings, we need to make sure that the pricing mechanisms, the tariff setting mechanisms, the social security mechanisms, the way we pay for energy is linked to our actual consumption. So that is the third challenge, and it's more of a financial challenge. And now I'm coming to the topic of finance, the challenge number 4. We are asking about financing multifamily residential buildings. But actually, we are not lending to a building. The building cannot repay the loan. We have to lend to the people. And it is not so obvious that this lending can happen easily, because we don't lend to individual people, we lend to the community of the people. So an entity that banks may not be very familiar with. So we had to ask our question, how this is possible to lend to a number of people who together need to invest in a multi-family residential building. Fortunately, we have a very good experience from countries of Central and Eastern Europe. The countries that I know the most are Poland, Hungary, and Ukraine. And the experience has been such that in each single one of those countries, there has not been a single default on the loan for multifamily residential housing renovation. Not a single one. And amounts of the loans that have been issued, it has been more than 40,000 of individual loans, and more than 2 billion euros was provided. Not a single default case. So it is not related to any geography. So in each of those countries, the models work exactly the same, and the people are as diligent in terms of their repayment as in any other country. So the experience has been extremely positive. That is why when I hear that banks cannot lend and they think it is risky and they need to have instruments that would de-risk their lending, or when I hear that a special lending instrument needs to be created, I know that these people just don't understand this sector, and they can do it if they understand how the lending works. So just to conclude, based on my experience in putting in place, I would say, quite a comprehensive package of reforms that led to creation of Ukraine Energy Efficiency Fund, there are two things that I always look at when I'm thinking about this sector. I'm thinking about ability, and I'm thinking about motivation. When I'm looking at ability, I'm asking myself a question: are the people able to do those changes that we want them to do? You know, can they take decision? Can they physically implement it? Are there barriers which preclude them from doing that? The second question I'm asking is motivation. I'm asking myself, why would they do it if they can? Why would they do it? Why would they want to invest? Why would they want to go through a hassle of talking to their neighbors and taking joint decisions? What motivates them? And just to say at the end, one important thing, energy efficiency and all the monetary savings are very important, obviously, not the most important. The most important is the property, the home in which they live. This is the most important assets that many families have. And to be able to live in a safe and comfortable home is the most important value for the people. And we know that people do those investments for this reason. And this is very good, because this is the motivation that lead to well-functioning models of financing energy efficiency in those countries that I have just mentioned, and many others as well could follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grzegorz. I believe you raised some very important points, and at the very end, you said it all. Why people do it? Do they really care about energy efficiency? Probably some do, but what most of them care about, or all of them care about, is their quality of life. So essentially, when doing this renovation, when doing this call it home improvement, at the scale of a multi-apartment building, the real reason is improving quality of life, improving quality of inside air. Essentially, you kept talking mostly about, I believe, heating issues. You kept talking about boiler houses, but more and more people think of what they do in summer, air conditioning. And air conditioning, I think, in almost everywhere now where we have in Eastern Europe, it's not centralized air conditioning. It's individual air conditioning, and that that's a different type of the problem and of a solution that needs to be. But again, what I take from your presentation as main points is improving quality of life. That's what people want. And from the financial side, there needs to be, if you wish, more education with the commercial banks on why this is essentially business as usual, why they can take it. It's not higher risk loan or investment, it's regular risk. And homeowner association, if there is proper legal basis, as you said and as Violeta said, when a country like Ukraine establishes it, then things work. Another issue, and I would want to come back to it later after we hear from other colleagues, is indeed the role of these grants, the role of this technical support and grants in the overall package. But let's get to that later. For now, thank you, Grzegorz. And for now, let's move to our next speaker, who is Andrew Popelka, Senior Energy Advisor at USAID. Again, we have the development agency talking. So Andrew, would like to hear your views on this in the region we're talking about. Andrew, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Oleg. Just checking if you hear me okay, because I'm calling from United States and might not be.
It is fine. Yes, I guess it's still relatively early in your neck of the woods, but yes, the connection is good. Thank you.
Okay, good. So thank you, Oleg. Thank you, and actually, I would like to thank to all the Habitat people who made this this conference possible. I know it was a heavy lift, and so I just want to let them know I truly appreciate that. We work with Habitat on this REELIH project for almost 10 years. It will be next summer will be 10-year anniversary. We have had a lot of experience on on the ground, and actually the hard lift through the experience, what we have learned, that we have done a study, done some gap analysis, and this all sort of boiled into sort of sort of a pretty strong opinion on how things are working. I actually have to say I agree with Violeta. I agree with the Grzegorz, and actually I have seen heard a really good statements, good comments, good opinions in the previous panel. So it's all, I think we are all in agreement, on major issues. There might be some nuances, in the opinion, who works, who does, but as Grzegorz said before, I also have a 4. Actually, if we can have the slide number 2, which has those barriers, because I don't see the screen. So we actually, when we look at the investment, when we look at sort of facilitating the investment in the energy efficiency, there is a in our view and our experience, 4 sort of topics. One is the legal and regulatory environment. Okay, that is actually that includes the directives, and the technical directives, actually the law on the homeowners association, how it's structured, how the bylaws is created. I have a personal experience with working for EBRD as a consultant some time ago in Moldova, where we drafted the homeowners association. It was beautifully done. It was done based on the Slovak example. When it was approved, it was a different document because there was a lot of interests which are modifying that. So that is very important. The enforcement of the payment, and there's a lot of things which actually, when you look at the legal environment, is about 50 to 70 legislation and directives and bylaws and everything, which actually create that environment. I have read and I agree that that the knowledge of among people, see what their motivation is, because if we say to the residents that we have to invest because we are going to reduce CO2, they might laugh at us, because that's not, it's important, but they see the quality of life as number one. Energy efficiency comes second, and when it actually converts into the monetary values, then we can actually see from our experience here, we can actually see the roles of the government and international institution, the donors and IFIs. It is supportive. I mean, they move the process forward, obviously, but they actually also have to look at the sustainability of the process. Fixing several buildings, let's say 50 buildings, or whatever number you put on it, it doesn't solve the problem, because there are tens of thousands of buildings. And so the thing is, I might a little bit disagree with with Grzegorz, maybe for the EIB and maybe for the international finance and for the development banking. I think he's right, but the thing is that when you look at the commercial banks, they are not in the business of losing money. They have to have the security. They have to have some de-risking process, and we talk to many portfolio managers in the commercial banks, and they would not really. They have to provide to their board. They have to provide the reasons why the money should be lent. So the de-risking of the investment in the residential sector, I think it's very important. So, but this is our sort of experience from what we have been doing for the 10 years, almost 10 years. So if we can move to slide number. Slide number 5, slide number 6, just in the sake of time. So this is something within the time we have. I don't want to probably we can discuss it more. There might be a pretty much two statements I would really like to make for for discussion. The thing is that, as I said, the government have the public funds, and they're using the taxpayers' money to support and move forward the renovation of the building, which is very important, because the buildings are a huge portion of the country's energy consumption, and that is coming. Most of the countries we work in, as a USA, it's coming from the imported gas, or actually worse, in the Western Balkans, it's coming from the coal, which is the polluting thing. It's killing us all. So we have to understand one thing, that the government has a good intention, and the IFIs and the donors, they have a good intention to move it forward, and they actually, when you look at it, they incentivize with the grants. Okay. Well, the question I would have is it sustainable? Does government has enough money to grant to everybody, or do we have to look at some other options? Do we have to look at the private investment? Do we have to look at the commercial banks to get involved heavily? Because as we all know, it's nothing new. The residential renovation, the building renovation market is huge, humongous. It's a billions, if not trillions of dollars or euros, for that matter. So that has to be done in a way that we have to step away, gradually or somehow to remove the subsidies. Because what we have seen in Ukraine, I was working in Ukraine in early 2000s. When there was a there was a program where they were handing over 20-30% of grant, and the grants dry out, and everything stopped. So we were saying, what the people were saying, no. Why should we spend our own money? We will wait for another program to come with 20-30%. And I have seen actually a program which had a 40%. Okay, well, let's go to the E5P, and the residential energy facility. There was almost 40%, was over 40%. So stuff like that. So if we go to slide 7, that would be actually my second sort of almost a personal wish. We have to develop a de-risking mechanism. We have to make the banks understand, look at, feel comfortable at the residential energy, energy efficiency, the renovation market, and working with the homeowners association. We tried at the REELIH project. We tried to actually all kinds of different approaches. One of them was that the individual people were actually signing off on the loan. I understand it would kill the banks with the administrative cost. That is not the way to go. We just try it. It can work for the small apartment buildings, but it will not work for the city, definitely. So the government should actually look at how to support the most vulnerable population. Take the money they have available for the subsidies and look at supporting people who cannot really afford it. Look at the socially based, and need-based subsidies, not to give a 20% over, everybody. And my typical line is not to support people who are driving 2020 Mercedes-Benz, okay, and still get subsidized from government. So, and I know it's a lot of issue. There's a lot of issue. There's a lot of corruption sort of perceptions, because once you target it, you may target it to your cousin, or you may target it to somebody who gives you kickback or something. There's a lot of potential for bad behavior. But that's also, in a summary, what we try to do in the REELIH, what we try to do in the USAID is to actually find a way which would be commercial, which would be sustainable, which should go without overloading the or state budgets, and where people will start to take care of their own property. And I'm idealistic in here, but it will happen one day. I might not be here at that time, but it will happen. So that it will actually become a commercial, the same as it is done in US and maybe in Western Europe. It should be done in our development, developing countries. So I think I'm over my time, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Andrew. I think you identified quite a few challenges and some ways of addressing them, and I have to say they're not easy. Again, the question of homeowner associations versus individual loans came up in your presentation, and well, it looks like a lot of people know Ukraine really well. Happy to hear, because I am originally from Ukraine. But if you walk along the streets of many Ukrainian cities, you may see that there is insulation over several apartments, while the whole building stays as it is, which actually makes the situation worse. It doesn't make it better. It seems like it would make it better for the household, for people who live in that particular apartment. Even for them, not really, because you'll have a mold problem. You'll have, well, I don't have to tell you, and I don't think that the audience we speak to today, that they would not know these problems. They would. So the issues are multiple. and it's not easy to address. And again, people think first and foremost about the quality of life, and they are they're selfish. They want life in their apartment to be good, and sometimes they don't think about others. So if there is a way to if you wish to make them think of the apartment building as a complex, as a whole, as something that needs to be whatever issues there are that they need to be addressed in that complex, that needs to be done. That's the way to go. We work at UNECE essentially with the same countries, and we address issues that are very similar. We have a project on energy efficiency standards in buildings, and we have done a gap analysis that looks at what the standards should be in kind of an ideal world. We have our own framework guidelines on energy efficiency standards in buildings and what they actually are. That's one gap. The other gap is what they are according to the books, the standards, and how they are actually implemented. And that's another gap. So we have done this gap analysis for 17 countries in Southeastern Europe, Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia, and the Russian Federation. And we have done 3 what we call in-depth gap analysis, national studies for 3 countries, Armenia, Moldova, and Kyrgyzstan. And there is a lot of work that needs to be done, but that's essential. That's one of the issues that Andrew indicated, the normative and legislative basis that makes it possible to do those improvements. That's what the banks will look at to start any kind of loan program or something like that. So that's something that needs to be taken into account. Well, now we go to we continue with the people who have money. So representatives of the international banks. So we go to Meran Lukic, principal banker at the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Meran, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Oleg. And I want to also thank the organizers for inviting the EBRD to present our experience in the residential building sector. So I'm mindful of time, I will be brief. This is the slide which provides an overview of the EBRD's engagement in this sector. So first of all, we are a development organization, so it is in our mandate that we support the national and local authorities in creating and enabling a legislative and regulatory environment. This means preparation of strategies, laws, secondary legislation, and other documents to enable the investments. And then, of course, we are the bank, so we finance investments. And in this wider region, it is mostly through 3 channels. First, through the commercial banks. This is our green economy facilities that our dear colleague and friend of EBRD, Violeta, spoke briefly about. That I will just mention in a few more sentences. The other way is through municipalities and municipally owned utilities. And the third way, energy efficiency funds, either sovereign or on commercial basis. And whenever we lend to public sector, we also accompany our loans with all sorts of technical assistance that is for project preparation and support in project implementation and capacity building. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick snapshot of our GAFF facilities. So far, we invested over 4.6 billion euro for residential energy efficiency investments across 27 countries, and by signing loan agreements with more than 150 banks. So ultimately, we reached out to over 200,000 households out there to finance their energy efficiency retrofit of their buildings. Next slide, please. And in the Western Balkans, the area that I'm coming from, we did it through 2 facilities so far. Out of 135 million euro loan that were approved, we signed 115 million with 22 commercial banks, and we reached out to over 10,000 end borrowers. It's worth mentioning that for this, we do, in addition to, so this is just the EBRD loan amount, but this is topped with the EU grants. Offered up to 20% to individual households and up to even 35% for multi-apartment buildings when the borrower is a housing association. And this is, of course, for investments that are eligible for for energy efficiency. Next slide. Technology selector, this is something that we're very proud of. It's one of the key features of GAFF Facilities. It's an online database of all sorts of green and energy efficient technologies that is accessible to end users that they can browse. There are over 20,000 products there. Once they select product, they also have a selection of over 5,000 vendors. So this facilitates basically path from end users to vendors and commercial banks for approving GAFF, and all technologies here are GAFF eligible. This is being regularly updated and it's a very useful tool. I invite you all to check it out. Next slide, please. Now, this is something that we have piloted in Serbia a couple of years ago. It's financing multi-apartment buildings through municipalities and district heating companies. In this case, we approved a small loan of about 2.5 million euro to a district heating company in the city of Šabac in Serbia for energy retrofit of around 40 residential multi-apartment buildings. The way how this is actually suitable, this product, for multi-apartment buildings, because in one of my previous slides, you saw that GAFF, the credit lines through commercial banks, offer subsidy incentive of up to 35%. But what turned out is that there is really no market for that. We invented this, we piloted this project as a response from the market because in Serbia, for example, there was not a single sub-loan that a commercial bank approved to a housing association. They simply do not recognize them as creditworthy, and as a result, there is a whole market out there of enormous energy consumers, multi-apartment buildings built in a Soviet era in their 60s and 70s that is completely under the radar. So as a result, as I said, we tried this pilot and it worked out really well. District heating company in a way acts as energy savings company. So what it does is it launches a tender for works, and then it gets repaid from tenants, and it also repays the loan to us from savings. We call it a public ESCO because it's a publicly owned. Normally, EBRD's mandate is to promote private sector wherever possible, but in this region, at least, it's still at early stage and there is no private sector engaged in energy retrofit of residential buildings. So to bridge this, we came up with this model. The buildings are selected based on expressed interest of tenants, specific heat consumption, square area, and in general condition of a building. Based once the works are implemented and the installation measures on the common areas of the building, including the building envelope, roof, basement, this results in savings of around 35% in this city in particular for the selected buildings. And then this results in lower heating costs, of course, for the tenants. Next slide, please. This is a brief graph with the key stakeholders and roles and responsibilities of how this works. So EBRD on the left, providing a loan to a district heating company alongside technical assistance to help implement this project once it's signed. Of course, there is a municipality as a regulator of tariffs, but also the owner of district heating company that provides a letter of support to us. It's important to mention this is off balance sheet for municipality, which is why they really like this project. The district heating company then launches a tender, signs contracts with contractors who implement works. Of course, they sign, the district heating company signs a contract with building, with housing associations, and then there are tenants who pay alongside their utility bill, their district heating bill. They also pay the investment, but we tailor the tenor of the loan such that there is no increase of utility bill. At most, it will stay the same over a period of time, but in most cases, it will actually go down. So the fixed component goes up, but the variable component goes down because consumption is significantly reduced. Next slide, please. This is just a key overview of some benefits. So for the tenants, obviously they get increased property value, their flat is worth more. Comfort, living conditions in an apartment is increased. For the first time, they have the ability to influence their consumption, and thus the heating bill and maintenance costs go down. But at the same time, there are benefits for a wider society and municipality. First of all, as I mentioned, this is financed from savings, so off balance sheet for municipalities. Their debt, they can use their debt capacity for something else. There are lower costs for natural gas and other heat sources in this area, some dirty coal and other polluting sources. Then there is a transition to consumption-based billing, because without that, it doesn't really make sense, but we actually condition our investment that after completion of investment, the building has to switch to consumption-based billing. There is a reduction of energy consumption by up to 50%, depending on scenario and the level of investments. There is local job creation because all these works are done locally, and of course there is air quality improvement. Next slide. This is just one of the buildings that was renovated last year, before and after renovation, with the thermo insulation and other energy efficiency measures. And I think with this, what we are doing now in Serbia, this actually picked up really well. It's a pilot that the government has also recognized, and we are now working with the government on Serbia on structuring a multi-city facility that will include many cities in next year. We're already doing studies, and we will be promoting this model in the rest of the Western Balkans and Southeastern and Eastern Europe. So that's all for this intro speech. Apologies, it was a bit longer. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Meran. We know the work that EBRD does and the financing that it provides. I think it gives a good idea of what can be done and what still needs to be done. I just wanted to mention it's still at a stage of a project proposal in North Macedonia. North Macedonia is one of the countries where Habitat for Humanity works. UNECE is a partner in this project proposal. The other and actually much bigger partners are UNDP in the country, International Organization for Migration, and EBRD. And it's a project proposal submitted to the SDG fund, the UN SDG fund. If it works, and we hope so, it is in the pipeline, it will address the issue of improving air quality, which is really bad in Skopje and other cities of North Macedonia, and also in combating climate change, but also would improve quality of life, not just by the quality of air, but other things in North Macedonia. It's creating of North Macedonia Green Finance Facility, and EBRD is prepared to commit a significant amount of money to that project, with SDG fund providing, if all goes well, certain money for essentially technical assistance, which is needed. And that would, again, make possible for local commercial banks to provide loans. They will have some grant part due to this project, and those would go to the households, but also to SMEs that work, small and medium enterprises that work on this energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements and equipment in multi-apartment buildings. So there are ways to go about it. There are ways to improve residential energy efficiency, and the idea that those who need this assistance most need to be supported in a particular way. That's very important. I think Andrew made some very good points on that, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed. We have received some questions in the chat now. However, I think it would be better if we finish with our initial statements. So I will give the floor now to Eda Omic, who is the economist at the Council of Europe Development Bank. So last but definitely not least in our list of speakers. So Eda, please, and then we'll go to some questions from the audience.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Because I was having a bit of technical problems earlier. Great, wonderful.
Eda, we hear you pretty well. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I think the organizers are trying to put up my presentation, but at the moment it might be having a bit of a problem. So I'm not sure if the presentation it's on everyone's screen. I don't know if everyone can see the presentation.
The presentation is on screen. It's the cover slide for now.
Okay, lovely. Well, so as an introduction, my name is Eda Omic. I'm an economist at the Council of Europe Development Bank. And actually, this is an area that I've done a lot of research and work on, and I hope to maybe give a more broad and macroeconomic perspective of what the situation is and what our work and research has shown, but also to show what our institution and the bank has been able to do over the last several decades. Next slide, please. So very quickly, if you're looking at the right slide, it's a map. It's just to show that we are the oldest multi-development bank. I just want to give a quick overview of what our bank is. We've been around since 1956, and actually our first mandate was to work on trying to solve the housing issue in post-World War II Europe. So we really have several decades of experience in housing, and obviously as the years have progressed, this has evolved into social housing and also in energy efficiency. Next slide, please. If the next slide is what it is, it should be looking at the social mandate of our bank. Our mandate of the bank is closely aligned to the goals of the Council of Europe, which is trying to promote social cohesion and to really work in investments that help promote social equality and inclusiveness within our societies. And of course, as a result, we focus on things like inclusive growth, supporting vulnerable groups, and environmental sustainability. And really, those last 2 points are how we tie our activity to the housing area, because we want to make sure that people have good housing conditions and living conditions, and that it's done in an environmentally and sustainable way. Just very quickly, our lending activity, I won't go into much detail, but we're a relatively small organization, but we work in very niche areas, in areas where there's very little public and private investment in the social sector, such as health, education, and housing. Next slide, please. And if we're looking at the next slide, it should be looking how we actually try to achieve our end goals. So we tend to work with governments, local and regional authorities, because usually these are the authorities at the subnational level which are responsible for most of the investment for social investments, especially in housing. And we also work with financial intermediaries and commercial banks. And we do this through things such as project loans, through co-financing facilities with EU funds, but also working with local governments to try to help them with funding financing gaps, and also to work on cross-sectoral loans. And we have a lot of partnerships. We work with the UN, the EU, with EIB and EBRD and the World Bank, some of the organizations that are here as well. And we use a lot of our donor funds and as well as our own profits to feed into grant funding so we can actually provide technical support, which I'll touch upon in a moment, and including something like the work we do in the Western Balkans, the Regional Housing Program, which is trying to build housing, affordable housing, and also energy efficient housing for those who were displaced during the wars in the 1990s. Next slide, please. The next slide is the one that I hope it is. It's a map of all of our activity. Really, in the last year, we've been able to allocate about 6 billion in funding on different social projects, and so and as you can see, it's in most European countries. Next slide, please. The next slide should be looking at our a very brief overview of our housing work. Mainly, our housing work is focusing on issues that are geared towards social housing and to help with vulnerable groups. So everything from single-parent families, migrants and refugees, people with disabilities, senior citizens, and much of that work in recent years, of course, has been with the overarching aim of trying to improve energy efficiency. And you can see a few examples of recent projects, and I'll touch upon in our later discussions when we have time on the Lithuania project, which is an example that I point to here and in the picture of a recent example where we actually were able to invest in the energy retrofits and the external renovation of multifamily apartments in cities that are not in the capital city. So it's in Jovana and Verona, which are relatively small cities within Lithuania. And really, the issues that we see from a financing standpoint is many of the things that have been already touched upon by other individuals. And I think maybe to offer a bit of perspectives on why we think this is important. Some of our studies have shown that when you increase energy efficiency, our work has shown that, for instance, if you increase energy efficiency in households by 10%, which is about roughly what most countries have been able to achieve in the last decade, you can actually see energy poverty rates be reduced by about 2 to 3%. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but if countries are able to achieve their energy efficiency goals that are been outlined in the latest COP agreements, for instance, which is 2 or 3 times more, you can really see large reductions in energy poverty just from energy efficiency. Now, the biggest reason that energy poverty is reduced is when incomes, of course, grow. But having this additional component of energy efficiency can really make a dent in energy poverty rates. And obviously, this has real profound effects for the households themselves. Not only in energy savings and bills, but also in their well-being and human capital development as well. If you live in a warm house that doesn't have dampness or other issues, you can have really a lot of educational and health positive outcomes. For instance, health outcomes have been exacerbated when you live in low-quality, low-energy efficient homes. We have a lot of studies on that as well. And even for young individuals, when they live in a warm house, their cognitive ability and performance in schools is elevated. So there's really a lot of positive well-being effects that need to be addressed. When it comes to the financing component, we do see similar problems. And I think we're in agreement with a lot of the panelists here when we say that, yes, there are issues in that there is a cost and price issue in the market. A lot of commercial banks do not supply some of the beneficiaries that we try to address. So, for instance, we don't see much funding towards low-income individuals because they're simply priced out of the market, or the market doesn't service them because banks see them as too much of a counterparty risk. And here we do agree with Andre, for instance, when he was saying that there needs to be more de-risking. And here we see it from the blending of grants and other financing instruments and lending from our institutions, for instance, to allow families to access commercial lending that otherwise they wouldn't be able to access. We also believe that households need better access to more flexible payment systems and repayment programs. We also believe firmly that you need to have a clear set of information to the residents themselves and to give them ownership of the process in the investment. We feel that actually creates a really large impact for residents because they can be able to alleviate some of their worries about the quality or about the cost associated with this. Residents sometimes might not know what the benefits are economically, and some might not be incentivized to go into energy efficiency because if they are given a subsidy, such as a utility subsidy from the state to cover their utility costs, they might not have any incentive to actually change the status quo. So you need to really have a good communication outreach program, which if we have more time in the communication and in our questions, I'll touch upon. and to show them that actually, in some cases, we've seen that the value of the home increases so much so after energy retrofit that it actually covers the cost of the energy retrofit over time. So this is really quite important. We also believe that strong funding needs to be given towards grant funding in things like technical capacity, so people can actually understand how to fully utilize the energy efficiency gains they've been able to achieve, so that the implementation of project is fully realized. I won't go into too much else, just to wrap it up here, but we also see that really it's very useful to work with national programs that do exist in many of the regions that we're operating in. So especially in Eastern Central European countries, there are a lot of national programs which are working towards achieving energy retrofits in multi-dwelling apartments and homes. And I think it's very important to work with institutions such as ours, IFIs, EBRD, EIB as well, because we are able to get preferential interest rate access in the financial markets, which we then pass on to the borrowers themselves by reducing their own costs as well, and with the national government, so we can actually leverage their own investments in these areas. And there's a lot of elements that we need to focus on in terms of how we create the technical criteria, audits, and looking at post hoc analysis of the price savings that occur and how that can be further passed on to the end user. So there are a lot of things that we can touch upon. I've only briefly looked at them, but I think coordinating with national authorities also is a very important element. And I'll stop there so we can have more time for discussions.
Thank you, Edu. I think it was a very good presentation, very good example. Again, as some of the questions that we receive already indicate, it is probably easier to work in Western European countries, including relatively new EU members like Lithuania or the ones in Central Europe. You also had examples from Ireland and Germany. But some very good and interesting points, and we would need to think on how that could be transferred. And I will get to a question on that in other countries of the region. The idea that energy efficiency leads to improving energy efficiency leads to reducing energy poverty, maybe not 1% for 1%, as you said, 10% leads to about 2 to 3%, but still it makes an improvement. So that's thank you for those points and for the work that the Council of Europe Development Bank is doing. We see that the members of the bank are all the countries of Western Balkans, and I think it's Georgia and Moldova that are also part from further east, and Turkey. So let's thank you all. Thank you to the distinguished speakers for their presentations. Very good contribution to our discussion, to finding the solutions to financing residential energy efficiency in multi-apartment buildings. I will now go to questions we have received from the audience. And the first one came from Sergiu Robu from Moldova. He works for the Institute of Power Engineering. The question, which maybe has been actually responded to some extent, but let me read the question, why the international financial institutions do not provide guarantees to ESCOs for energy efficiency project implementation for multi-apartment buildings. ESCOs have expertise and knowledge for energy efficiency projects implementation. Maybe I'll start with Meran, if he would like to answer, because you actually mentioned the ESCO example. Again, that may not yet be applicable to Moldova, but if you can start, and maybe other colleagues from EBRD and EIB could add something. Sorry, from Council of Europe Development Bank and EIB could add.
Sure. Yeah, of course, no problem. Thank you, Oleg. Actually, it's a good question. I myself, I'm covering the Western Balkans, but I must say that I have not come across a request from a private ESCO for guarantee mechanism to finance multi-apartment buildings. In our region, we don't really see that many private ESCO companies. The ones that we do see are after projects like street lighting, maybe some public buildings with some quick, I don't want to say quick, but faster payback periods. And part of the reason why there are not so many private ESCO companies is what I mentioned in my presentation. The energy prices are too low and the payback periods are too long for some of them. We did have some requests and we actually tried to work with a couple of ESCO companies in Southeastern Europe, some sort of forfeiting mechanisms whereby we purchased their receivables, but it didn't really work out. It was too risky, and I think it will, this region, unlike in Western Europe, where I understand there are many more ESCOs engaged in multi-apartment buildings refurbishment, this region, in my opinion, is still not ready for that kind of market.
Thank you, Madam. I think Grzegorz wanted to add.
Yes. So, yeah, let me say it this way. I mean, maybe this opinion is not fully shared by my colleagues from the EIB and other colleagues present here on this conference, but I believe that ESCOs and multi-apartment buildings in Central and Eastern Europe are really not a very good match, but for another reason than the cost of energy. I think that the reason here is that an investment in one building for an ESCO is not that much of an investment, really. And at the same time, you have about 100 of control points and about 100 of people who will turn the knobs, open windows, and their behavior is completely impossible to be managed and controlled by the private ESCO company. And it is this behavior that could either ensure profitability of the ESCO project or a complete failure thereof. So I think this is really what makes private ESCOs not interested, actually unable to carry out energy efficiency renovation projects in multi-apartment buildings in Central and Eastern Europe. However, there are better examples, and these examples are from Czech Republic. And we came across, when we were working on best practices to be applied in Ukraine, we came up across kind of energy efficiency project developers. And these companies were doing some substantially similar work as ESCOs normally do. So they would design the investment, they will prepare a budget for that investment, they will put in place financing model for that investment that involves bank lending, but also all applicable grant elements. They would then implement the investment, and then they would say charge 2% of the management fee for that and walk away. Whereas the homeowners associations will be left with modernized building and with a loan that has been taken to finance them together with all applicable grants. By doing this, these companies could do thousands of apartments without taking substantial financial obligations. So they could be very agile and very quick in the work they've done. And I think this is quite an interesting business model for multi-family apartment renovations. Sometimes this is also combined with property management function, but not necessarily. So I would rather, if I would recommend something, I would rather recommend to focus on creation of those energy efficiency developer companies rather than ESCOs. Thank you.
Thank you, Grzegorz. I don't know if Edo has anything to add or okay. All right, let me move to the next question, which comes from actually our organizers, from Juri Sumegi from Habitat for Humanity International. So how can we help knowledge transfer between commercial banks in Central Europe and commercial banks outside the European Union to demonstrate that providing loans to homeowner associations is a safe and good business. Anyone who is the taker? Grzegorz, please.
Yeah, well, I've done it, and I can say how I've done it. So it was simple. I mean, we just took the people from one bank to meet people from another bank, and they talked about this. And it was very, very simple to do it. But what really had to happen before was actually to make local bankers interested in getting into this new market and to make them interested so that they actually want to go on a trip that we sponsor. That took us quite some time. And here we really had to invest in quite an full-fledged PR activity. We had to make residential energy efficiency a topic which is talked about in the press, which is talked about in the financial circles, which is talked about in the NGO community. And by doing this, we created this interest to which we could have responded by bringing the people from one bank to talk to another bank. And then they realized, okay, this is not difficult, we can do it as well. And they started doing it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Grzegorz. That was a good example. Can you tell us which countries they were? Which ones were there is? Which one was the recipient? Which one was the one providing this know-how?
Yeah, I remember this very well because it was at that time a time of a big flood that happened in Prague. This is where we took people from commercial banks from Ukraine. We took them to Prague so that they could meet CSOB Bank, which was a leader in residential energy efficiency financing in Czech Republic. It was enough that these two CEOs talked for 2 hours to understand how this business actually works, and it was enough for the Ukrainian bankers to give it a try.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Grzegorz. Anyone would like to add anything to this? Any response? Andrew, please.
Yeah, I just EBRD for in this respect. There was a time when EBRD have made this a big strive. It was a very deep analysis of the residential market, which actually shows how big it is, how many billions of euros are necessary for refurbishment just of the multi-apartment buildings. This was actually a prelude to the which was created, the Ukrainian what the name was, Ukrainian energy efficiency fund for the residential sector. I think what is when talking to and trying to convince the commercial banks to engage in this, they have to know the size, they have to know the number. People, and sorry if I didn't mean to offend anybody, but they are fact based. They cannot. So I think that the donors actually can help with that. Donors can organize a study, or the market to bring up because this study for Ukraine, I think it's when I'm with the it's about 10 years ago. So that's because a lot of things have happened since then. So it has to be up to date, and I think this is the first step. So the bank, and as Grzegorz said, the exchange of the information is very important. But also, when you talk to them, you have to talk about facts. I think donors can actually, international donors can engage and help with that. So.
Thank you, Andrew. You were breaking off a little bit, so I'm not sure that everybody was able to catch everything that you said, but I think the main points we did catch. It's something with your connection, I believe. But let's hope. Okay. Again, just to note that banks do, if they see clearly what benefit they have, that the risks are reduced, that there is support from international development banks, they do take it on. An example that I gave before from North Macedonia, for that project proposal, there are letters of intent, so essentially commitment from 9 banks in North Macedonia that cover altogether 90% of the market. That's not insignificant. And it shows that indeed the commercial banks, if they see what they get out of it, will take it on. I think for the questions from the audience, that's what we have for now. We have prepared some questions for discussion, but in fact, I believe in our conversation, most of them have been covered. We have 8 minutes before the end of the session. So I would probably, rather than go into the questions, because the questions essentially, they were about the biggest challenges in financing energy efficient renovation, and that was covered pretty well. Good example of financing tools and schemes in the region that work successfully. We have that as well. And also, what does the organization do in terms of contribution to solving the challenges connected with financing? So I think we had all that. Rather than ask any more questions, I would probably give each of you a chance to say essentially one main point, one takeaway from what we had today in terms of what is well, let's say one main thing that we can do to solve the problems that you indicated. So something really major that you think would move the dial, would make the real change. And let's go in the order that the presentations went. So I would like to start with Violeta, if she's ready. Please unmute. Please unmute, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you very much. Indeed, Oleg, if I knew the answer, I would be resting on a beach somewhere else. But from my personal experience coming from Romania many years ago, but when we started this big attack on multi-apartment buildings renovation, I think apart from a very healthy grant component, I think what was good and what helped a lot was the kind of project management, a setup, because we may always expect that the wise people in the bank and the wise residents will just meet halfway, and by magic they will all agree on all aspects, and next day they will start implementing. And in my, as I said, humble experience in Romania, or with Romania, but also what we observe in other countries is that you really need an agent, the one between the two, actually to put together these applications. By even if the homeowners association, they work like a charm. You know, you have the law, they have the fund for maintenance, they have a buildings management company or person. You have everything in place. Still, you would need this this kind of I call it project management, because I think you can call it governance of this kind of enterprise, because you would need somebody to actually hold hands with this homeowner association managers explain the application process, have a simple application process, clear forms, application forms, and then you will need somebody, in our case, it's local municipalities that in principle do the procurement of works, because most of these grants in the EU, they come as public funding, so you have to do the public procurement for works, and then they supervise the works and they make the payment at the end. So in this particular setup, if you just leave it to the homeowners association by themselves to do all this preparatory work and contracting, that may not be very easy for them to do it. I know that, for example, EBRD, I'm very familiar with GAFF. It works a lot on the sort of private initiative move. It works well because for now it works with individual households. So they have a bit better decision making and a better grasp of what needs to be done, and the banks are already prepared, trained, and still there is an expert in the banks that help them put together, even based on the technology selector, the project specification, if you want. So you need this setup, and for this you need TA and you need a wise man to, in my view, to put it all together with all the availability of money and all the other goodies on the table.
Thank you, Violeta. Thank you. Let's give the chance to other colleagues. We have exactly 7 minutes left. Grzegorz, I think what Violeta said kind of confirms what you said about these energy efficiency development companies. One takeaway in 1 minute.
Yes, and I will offer a solution that you probably would not expect, but I think it would be interesting for me if you gave it a bit of thought. When I'm looking at the topic of residential energy efficiency for low-income households, which is the overarching topic of our meeting today, I'm thinking that actually low-income households are not very good homeowners. I mean, when I look at the situation here in Western Europe, where I currently work, those people actually live in a very well-designed rental accommodation, which is provided to them at affordable rent. Now, the owner is somebody else, typically an institution, which is a professional and an institution that has access to good financing sources. I believe that a solution for residential energy efficiency for low-income households in the long run is actually to provide people from this group access to public rental housing with affordable rents and security of tenure. That would probably be the solution that would actually enable to solve the situation once and for all. It would require substantial change in the way the governments of Central, Eastern, and Southern European countries think about housing, but I think this is really the right. Thank you.
Thank you, Grzegorz. It's an interesting point, and I think it's actually a valid point, but it would require probably even more time than other measures in energy efficiency. It requires change of mentality, because for countries of the former Soviet Union and former, let's call it Eastern Bloc, it's often the idea that they are now homeowners, even if they are not a very good ones, is still important. However, as we know, apartment rental goes up in those countries as well, so maybe it will move that way. Thank you. Andrew, please, I see you have changed your earphones.
Yeah, hopefully that will help.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so all right. I would like to see, what I would like to see is in with the government, IFIs, donors, think sustainable. Look at the long run. Don't do onesies and twosies. Look at sustainable approach, which can be repeated and repeated, and there are no losers. There are some winners. And that means look at what the subsidies are doing. They have unintended consequences. And that has to be really well understood when we use subsidies. See what they do and that. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. The idea that the market shouldn't be distorted, I think, is very important. Let's go to Meran now, please.
Okay, thank you, Oleg. I mean, I guess to address your question, the best way would be to really comment and to address some of the barriers to energy efficiency investments in residential sector. We have just recently completed one big study together with KfW here in Serbia that, among other things, recognize a number of barriers to investments. And number one, there's really no incentive for multi-apartment building owners and housing association to get into these investments. So most of multi-apartment buildings are connected to district heating systems, but they don't pay according to their consumption. They pay normative. So there's simply no incentive, and they need to have this incentive. So there needs to be this switch to consumption-based building so that they can do something about it. Otherwise, there's no change. Number two, we need a stronger capacity at the national level and at the municipal level to be a champion of these investments, including for the model that we offered, which we think is really good and has a potential, but still will lack. There is a lot of capacity lacking. Money is there. I think all of the banks who spoke here spoke about hundreds of millions and billions of euros available with the EU incentives and other bilateral donors as well. So we need incentives, and we need somebody who will help implement these projects from the public sector as well. And of course, to create a regulation where it's lacking to enable these investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Meran. I think Edo will have 1 minute because the session will end. So Edo,
Sure.
Please be brief, and then
I'll be very brief and very quick. I think I more or less agree with most of what's already been said, and I think one element is what effective financing will need, as I was saying earlier, an effective blending of the grants and the private financing. And to echo what other people were saying already, really these grants need to be utilized in combination with national authorities and vehicles that are being designed to actually target energy efficiency in the housing sectors and multi-dwelling apartments. Because these are people who know the counterparties the best. They can actually help them streamline the process of applications, which is what Violeta was saying. And we actually seen that as an important component, because they can utilize the grant funding that they have from their own resources and our resources as from institutions like ours to actually fund short-term financing needs, which can then crowd in additional private funding, but at the same time help the individuals understand the process better, how they can participate in the decision-making process of how they actually implement the energy efficiency in their homes, and so they can actually have that ownership. That's, I think, extraordinarily vital for the final implementation of it, and the necessary technical assistance funding to help train individuals to better utilize those energy efficiency improvements, so you can actually see the full long-term potential of them. So that's a broad overview of some issues.
Thank you, Edo, and I would like to thank all panelists for this thought-provoking discussion. And good luck to us all. We do need to make it happen. Thank you all, and we're over. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
hope the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.